There are stories as old as the stones of Babylon, stories that make us question what is divine and what is monstrous. What are the limits of devotion to the sacred? You may judge the actions to be described, but the feeling of helplessness can lead us to take unimaginable actions. This is the story of a devoted young woman, pure of heart, who, even in the face of trials, only wishes the best for her people. In the suffocating heat of Babylon, on the red brick steps of the Temple of Purgation, a child was left behind. Adiris, the youngest of 7 siblings, was taken in by the temple priests. Among them, there was one who stood out, Sarmath, the devotee. His presence was serene, his words always filled with wisdom. Adiris saw him as a father, a being full of knowledge she could look up to. Though she was very young, she was always attentive to the worship rituals and the wise words of the priests. As time passed, Adiris grew and learned more and more about the gods and how to worship them, preparing for a life of devotion in service to her people. When the plague arrived, it spared no one. Bodies rotted in the streets and the air was thick with the smell of death. Inside the temple, the priests tried to hold back the panic, performing purification rituals and endless prayers. But one by one, they fell to the disease. First, the youngest fell, coughing blood on the steps of the altar. Then the others followed, their bodies marked with black abscesses. Finally, only 2 remained: Adiris, the young woman who sought to serve, and Sarmath, the devotee, whose advanced age prevented him from continuing the rituals. With the temple empty of priests, the people gathered at the gates, crying out for salvation. Adiris, filled with uncertainty, sought out Sarmath in the temple gardens, where he always seemed to find refuge.
Sarmath, they're all gone. It's just us now. What will we do? I'm not worthy of leading the rituals.
Adiris said, her voice trembling.
My daughter, dignity comes from necessity. The temple cannot fall silent. The people need faith, hope, and a leader. You have been chosen, Adiris. The gods will speak through you.
And if I fail? And if the gods abandon me?
The gods do not abandon their devotees, but you must act. Show them your faith is true. Only then will they answer.
With Sarmath's words resonating in her heart, Adiris took on the role of priestess, facing the despair of her people with a faith that grew stronger every day. In the grand hall of the temple, Adiris conducted a ritual. The smoke of incense rose through the columns while the faithful knelt, pleading for mercy. It was then that a woman staggered to the altar, her skin covered in black, pulsating sores.
Priestess, please, save me. The gods will hear your prayers. I can't bear this pain anymore.
My daughter, the gods are merciful. They will not abandon their people.
Adiris, in pure desperation and not knowing what else to do, turned to the great statue in the center of the hall for answers. Suddenly, the voice of Sarmath echoed in her mind.
The gods demand sacrifices, Adiris. Sometimes what they desire is not just prayer, but flesh. An act of true devotion can save many.
With these words, Adiris made her decision. Grabbing the sacred dagger, she rose and looked at the faithful, now in a silence of reverence and horror.
Great gods, accept this sacrifice as proof of my faith. Heal this woman and protect your people.
The blade descended and blood stained the altar. Adiris offered her toe as an offering, and the people, struck with awe, hailed her as the priestess chosen by the gods. That night, while Adiris prayed alone at the altar, the silence of the temple was broken only by the sound of her whispers. In the shadows, Sarmath watched her. His eyes, always calm, now glowed with a red light, like embers hidden in the dark.
Great gods, if my sacrifice was not enough, show me the way. Give me a sign to save my people.
But the gods remained silent. As Adiris knelt, Sarmath approached her slowly, so as not to disturb her. Adiris noticed the movement and looked in his direction, questioning him.
I've given everything, my blood, my flesh, yet the people still suffer. What more do the gods want from me?
Sarmath knelt beside Adiris and spoke in a serene voice.
Perhaps, my daughter, the answers are not here. The gods abandon those who no longer serve them, those who have lost faith. You have been abandoned, Adiris.
Adiris looked at Sarmath, confused.
What do you mean? I'm doing everything I can. I haven't lost my faith.
I believe, my daughter, but perhaps the gods disagree. Maybe you are not the chosen one after all. You just cry and stay here, praying and praying. Do something great. Lead your people. Show the gods you are worthy.
Adiris was completely taken aback by Sarmath's words, but she heard them as the harsh words of a father she never had. The next day, Adiris made a final decision. She would lead her people on a pilgrimage, seeking a place far from the shadows of death. Before departing, Adiris went to the temple garden to summon Sarmath toward the light. When she arrived, she found his body already decomposing, with wounds and blisters all over. Adiris was used to death, but this? With no time for mourning, she turned back to the grand hall where her people waited. She and her devotees, weakened and sick, left Babylon. They walked through scorching deserts and dense forests, guided only by their faith. Their prayers echoed under the open sky until they reached a cave in the cold lands of Urashtu. There, in the damp cold of the cave, Adiris, seeing her people withering and unable to go on, reached her limit. She prepared an incense burner with ivy, sage, and other herbs to end the suffering. Adiris then sealed the cave entrance, raised her incense burner, and the dense aroma of the herbs mixed with the black smoke. With tears in her eyes, she made her final prayer. All fell. Adiris awoke in the middle of the grand hall of the temple. All the servants had vanished, her skin completely overtaken by the plague. All she could feel was hatred. Hatred for the gods who had abandoned her, hatred for the priests who had gone without giving her guidance, and hatred for the plague. Now Adiris roams the temple of purgation, seeking faithful followers to free them from suffering. Death is the only true salvation. In her search for salvation, Adiris became the sacrifice. In the absence of the gods, she became the judgment. And you? What stories would you like to hear? Let me know in the comments, but be careful. The entity doesn't like to be exposed. Leave a like and see you in the next tale.